Okay.
Protect the remaining dig sites.
We're back. We have
Need to use the
sound.
power cell for the
I hope.
excavator.
Test, test. Can people hear me?
Okay. Let me turn you up a bit. Okay, say something now.
Say something now.
Okay. Close enough.
We're
Okay, so we were talking about Diablo Immortal.
talking about a lot of stuff, but I guess nobody heard my
I know. No, it's
blah,
my
blah, blah.
show.
Exactly. It's just mute me.
I'll let you speak when it's your turn.
Wow.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so if you want to hang out off stream, check out the Discord. Okay, sorry. I forgot. I'm not my bot. My bot is another human. No, bots are not people. I have to remind myself this. Okay, so today we're talking about Storybricks. Hey, Sai, what's Storybricks?
we can go over a couple of the topics we talked about. You started talking about because I think the Diablo Immortal thing is kind of interesting because as I was saying before I was so rudely muted, was that a lot of developers kind of like that I follow on Twitter kind of felt like the players are being a little entitled, and so, but like the kind of the counter argument I saw some people were able to express was that Blizzard had been kind of hinting about Diablo announcement at BlizzCon for a while, and
Almost a
so
year.
yeah, and so like the PC based community thought it was going to be a PC based announcement, and so when the big announcement is that Diablo is always a new mobile game, like a lot of people were kind of like felt like it was a bait and switch. And so and especially kind of like a lot of the hand waving explanations kind of didn't make it better. Well, they're farming it out, and it's not they're not taking away development resources and all
Yeah, they
this
have
stuff.
multiple teams and
Right.
actually let me get a picture of what I saw. Which
Yo.
sorry, I gotta mute that. Yeah, here we go. The guy's expression when he gets booed on the stage is freaking priceless because that like summarizes Blizzard in a nutshell.
Right.
Uh oh.
I mean, and to be fair, like like them making the mobile game is probably going to be super profitable for them. You were mentioning before, like China is a huge market for Blizzard. Um, Asian countries tend to be a lot more mobile focused than we are here in the West, and so it's probably going to be a huge moneymaker for them. But that's not what the Western market wants. Like the Western market wanted a Diablo announcement.
Mm-hmm. And the other fear about it is that it's just a reskin of another Chinese mobile game that's out. And
Right.
that they're developing in partnership with the company that owns that other game. I can't think of the name of it off the top of my
Right.
head.
Right.
Oh, let me see if I can find it.
Again, it'll probably be super profitable for them, but it shows kind of a bit of potential, like not understanding their audience.
Or not caring. Like,
Well, I mean, like, I think it's more kind of like not understanding the audience because
mm-hmm.
they made this big announcement at BlizzCon. Like, I mean, the whole reason they have BlizzCon is because people want to hear about Blizzard games. Like, there's some hardcore Blizzard fans that want to go and celebrate Blizzard games,
We can
and so
refill.
oh, yeah. Um,
Let me pull up my chat again because I'm not trying to ignore you guys. Oh, thank you for the bits, Villa. I appreciate it. Let's see here. Dejara says Blizzard screwed up in a huge way. Fans overreacted. Film at 11.
Right. And I'm, I think, I don't know. I'd be hesitant to say that there was an overreaction. I think, it's like anything on the internet. It tends to be like a lot. It tends to be a lot more. Tends to be a lot louder and more explicit than it really is. You kind of have to be loud and obnoxious on the internet in order to get attention. So.
And everyone on the internet wants attention.
I mean, like there's a lot of stuff on the internet. So in order to kind of rise above the background noise, you kind of have to be, stand out. One of the ways to stand out
Thank you for training us, Kotaku.
Right, exactly.
You
won't believe what Blizzard did. Click here to hear my rant now.
Top 5 articles on fandom.
Gotta get that clickbait going.
But okay, that is what Blizzard is best at, though, is clickbait via their announcement systems. Like,
well, like the concept of clickbait is basically to get attention. So yeah, like Blizzard, is really good at marketing. At basically getting attention through their marketing.
And it honestly wouldn't surprise me if this was an intentional move.
I have a hard time believing that.
On some level, trying to, because now people are talking about Blizzard again,
Right. I would have a hard time saying they intentionally did this, but I think that they're not, things aren't as dire as they might, the whole, any attention is good attention.
Right. But that's just my cynical.
I don't like. I don't think I don't think they would necessarily have intentionally done it this way.
Mm-hmm.
Because I mean, it does kind of piss off a lot of the fans. But I think on the flip side, I don't think, oh my god, Blizzard's dying now because they're making a mobile game.
Go to the dig site.
Right. Oh my goodness. They're just pandering to the Chinese. They've been doing that for years.
Right. I mean, the World of Warcraft movie was, funded, basically, produced and basically impartially funded, large part by, Chinese company. So
they freaking loved it in Japan.
Oh, yeah.
What?
All the Asians are the same. I see how you are racist.
I'm sorry.
Wow.
My racist came out for a second.
Wow. You're gonna be the uncle at Christmas that everybody's ashamed of now. I'll invite you to Thanksgiving.
They don't celebrate Thanksgiving in China.
But yeah, no, the movie was huge. It was a lot more popular. It got a lot more revenue.
But
Yeah, it was not very well received here, but yeah, it made just a ton of money. It made all its money back in China. So.
But anyway, back on top, off topic.
Okay. Right.
So, but it's interesting though, because this, regardless of the outrage, they're probably going to make tons and tons of money off of it.
Right.
Because it's another microtransaction media for them. So.
Well, I mean, and the argument for doing mobile games is the installed base is a lot higher.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot more mobile phones than there are people with game-worthy PCs or consoles.
Yeah, I forget what the number was. I think Clash of Clans at its peak had 40 million users.
Right.
Some point.
Of course, the trick is basically you're playing probability and numbers.
Right.
Where they have a ton of people playing, but the number of people actually paying is small. But the amount of money that they're paying each, can be
thousands
pretty
of
big.
dollars.
Right.
That's when you get whales.
Right, especially when you get to the whales, which but there's been a lot less emphasis on catering to whales lately in mobile games.
Off topic, I just want to bring up that Square Enix released a whale mount in Final Fantasy XIV. I think they're thanking their whales on the cash shop.
Like literally, huh?
Yeah. I just saw that and I was just like, oh boy. Anyways, okay. And it's a 2-person mount too, so the whales can bring a friend with them.
Hopefully the friend will spend as much money too. Oh.
Ooh.
I mean, like a lot of mobile games did have, the refer a friend, That's kind of what made Zynga big in the first place was,
Mm-hmm.
you give somebody a cow. Well, now you gotta have to go play, Farmville in order to get your gift.
The reactant is working on your relic.
Um,
Find more.
So I don't know how to segue this now. Thank you.
Well, we can just be ungraceful. Okay, so the topic is Storybricks, and you asked me to describe it.
Right. So speaking of companies that try to get into mobile games, do you want to talk about Storybricks for us today? There you go. I saved it.
Sure. So basically, Storybricks was the idea behind Storybricks was we wanted to do basically bring advanced AI techniques to game development, specifically MMOs. The idea was that we'd have NPCs that wouldn't exactly be human-like, but would be a lot more interactive than kind of your typical NPCs are in games in MMOs.
I think I forget if you described it or if I called it dynamic AI.
That was one of the things we talked about, calling it dynamic AI, because like a lot of it was basically how you model a character in such a way that they can actually have desires and express interest and try to achieve their own goals.
This character has gold in their inventory. I want to kill them.
Right. I want gold. This character has gold. I don't mind killing people, so therefore
I will kill this person.
Right, for the gold. And then now I have gold, but it's stolen. And I know that's bad, so I need to avoid
city guards.
Law. Basically, the law.
Now we're just talking about Skyrim at this point. So.
Well, I mean, what we wanted to do was not like unheard of. But what we wanted to do is there's kind of two parts to it, I think, that was kind of novel. One, we wanted to make it easier than basically just having a bunch of AI scripters going through and creating like mega
conditions.
Right.
Which does not sound like fun.
Well, I mean, again,
that is Skyrim levels of dedication.
Right. Well, I mean, when you have a big team that can basically do that type of thing.
Speaking of 100-hour weeks.
Right. Well, I mean, going back to kind of the time about the 100-hour weeks. I mean, again, that's crunch. That's a very common thing. You want to leave already?
I guess. Okay. Oh, he's gone. So. Screw that guy.
Your hard work has just been rewarded.
And so and the other thing we want to do is we wanted to basically use this to tell stories a lot more. Because one of the ideas we kind of like was playing around with. One of the things we played around with was the idea of having what we call plots, which is basically like essentially like a structure that basically we can fit other NPCs into. Specifically, like, so for example, we might have a love triangle plot. So you would look for certain NPCs to kind of fit the bill.
Mm-hmm.
You have a couple that are
Want to open the relic.
not completely maybe not completely committed to each other. At least one of them is not. You have another person that falls in love with one of the couple.
The scanner has picked up a target. Go to the dig site.
And then basically you basically have this love triangle that kind of plays out.
Excavator deployed.
Dejara asked a question when
Yeah.
you finished his thought.
And the really interesting thing then becomes what happens if you have a player that fits in one of those three positions in the love triangle plot.
Mm-hmm.
What if you have a player who basically is the one that's either disrupting or has a NPC, they're in a relationship with an NPC and then the NPC strays or whatever, creating basically having this plot that is a lot more interesting than having it being necessarily being super scripted.
Mm-hmm.
For these specific characters, having be more of a kind of a generic template for an interesting story.
Right. Which makes things more interesting.
Right. And the idea would, we could create more plots, and then you could create characters, and each character would have its own personality. So, you might have a love triangle where like the couple basically kind of reaffirms their, oh sorry I strayed, you're the one for me. You might have, depending on the personalities, you might have another one where it basically ends up like, yeah, I was bored with you, and this new person's better for me, so see ya.
Ooh, dark.
Right. I mean, again, like the idea is that we're trying to tell stories. We're trying to keep the world interesting. We're trying to give it that spark of life.
It sounds like single-player roleplay.
Well, I mean, again, it's supposed to be kind of an MMO, so instead of just having NPCs that stand around or have very, very heavily scripted behaviors in cities, you'd have this world full of things like, oh, there's a love triangle go over here, and kind of going back to the Bartle types. I mean, this would be the stuff that socializers would really enjoy, because then they could start gossiping about NPCs instead of just being like, oh,
that'd be funny.
Drama happened over in this guild,
That would be just thinking about it. That would be so meme worthy. Like how you have like Clem and Warframe. You could have people just making memes about NPCs doing weird things. That'd be so funny. Dejara had a question.
Yes.
You said, so when you say AI techniques, you mean what exactly? Expert systems, production rules, neural networks, etc.?
We were using what are called utility systems. Mostly, one of the contractors that's working with us was big into using utility systems. What a utility system is basically the agent takes a look at input from the environment and then basically weighs it. Usually, it's usually easier to put these things in terms of like shooter games. So let me give that example, because so I don't get into kind of some of the esoteric stuff we were doing in Storybricks. So the idea would be that you have a shooter, an enemy in a shooter game, and say it has limited ammo and limited health, and it wants to
shoot you.
It basically wants to kill the player. Yeah. So it would take its input, and the input would be proximity to the player, its own health levels, and the amount of ammo it has left. And it basically weigh these things and kind of decide what it wants to do. I think I made a terrible mistake.
Protect the unit while it extracts the artifact.
Sorry, are you trying to link something to Jaro?
And so basically, if the player's really close, but it's low on ammo, it depends. It basically depends on kind of how you weigh these things.
Ooh.
It depends on how you weigh these things. So, like, if the player's really close, but it's low on ammo, the rules will kind of determine whether it's going to go get more ammo if it tries to kill the player.
Depending on what its parameters are.
Right. Well, I mean, basically you have different weights. So, like, each bullet is worth a point. Like every meter you're close to the character is worth a point. Or that type of thing.
Yeah, I was
And
thinking
so
about it in terms of like RTSs for resource management versus base defense, for example.
right. And so like a lot like what games usually do are for AI are what are called behavioral trees,
Look for more
which are essentially very fancy if then else statements. If I'm
Mhm.
close to um, behavioral systems basically allow essentially allow for more emergent behavior where the system can kind of determine, okay, well I've got 15 bullets, which is worth, I guess a better way to put it, think about it would be like every bullet missing is worth a point. Every meter far away the player is worth 2 points or something like that. And so it would basically like tally up it would tally up its the totals and try to kind of figure out it total up the points and then try to figure out, okay, well what's my most pressing need.
Mhm.
If I'm low on ammo, then my most pressing need is probably going to be to go
Get ammo.
get ammo. If the player's really close, my pressing need is probably going to go try to kill the player. If my health is low, then my pressing need is probably going to be try to go find health.
Oh, that actually reminds me. I was playing Rust.
Oh shoot!
Oh, did you screw up? Did we all
I didn't
screw up? We all screwed up.
Yeah, he got one. He got.
Ooh, lucky him.
Yeah.
And so part of Rust, you have to hunt animals to get meat and get other resources from them. And the animal AI is freaking hilarious.
Oh yeah.
Because if you get it on a extremely sloped hill, it will run up the hill, slide down, and then basically just run a circle trying to climb back up the hill again.
Right.
Just to fall off again. And you'll just be chasing it in circles for minutes because it runs faster than you. And you just have this spear just be like, come here, deer, deer, deer. And it's just like, no. But the AI has like such of a hard set path that it wants to take.
Right. And like a lot of that is basically pathfinding, like how the agents kind of figure out how to navigate the world. Like like game AI as a whole tends to be like viewed kind of in the lens of a certain few things, like pathfinding and behavior and whatnot.
Right. Oh, and Dejara commented no plan generation. Then I'm not.
Well, yes, that was kind of like one of the things we were kind of looking at. Basically, like one of the things that one of the games that we were kind of looking at a lot was Left 4 Dead 2, which had what was called the Director AI, which basically kind of was the thing that kind of plotted the pacing. And where it it plotted the pacing, and so basically like it would kind of like it would basically plan lulls, and then as soon as you got near certain points, or if it had been a certain amount of time or whatnot, it would then kind of send a horde of monsters at you. And this is one of the things that kind of made the game very compelling, because
to keep moving and you had to stay as a group, because if you
right, and
got
you
get hoarded.
Right. The Director AI was basically tuned very well to to kind of keep the game fresh, to keep the game going. So you'd have kind of like a lot of people kind of commented on its ability to kind of like have these peaks and troughs, where you'd have like very intense combat. Where if the game were that intense all the time,
it'd be overwhelming.
Right, it would actually be very wearying. But if when you have kind of the lull before the excitement, the calm before the storm, that makes it feel a lot more interesting.
Exactly. Yeah, and we've actually been playing some Vermintide 2.
Which is very much very similar to Left 4 Dead 2, yeah.
And it does get very addicting because my only complaint is that it's very predictable. Well, I mean, from what you and I have been playing, it's we've been playing on easy mode. Unless you went up harder without me.
No, not yet.
Okay.
I am almost done with the campaign. The doing everything on the easiest level though.
Oh, I need to catch up then. Jeez.
Yeah, you do.
Sorry,
I've been enjoying the game a lot. So.
Apparently. My only complaint is that it's very predictable once you know the map, where the laws and rushes are.
Right. Well, I mean, but that's part of learning the game. I think that's a valid
strategy.
Yeah. Is basically like, because like roguelikes are a bit like this. Like, you play a character, you die permanently, but what you carry from one game to the next is basically a knowledge of how the game system works. I think it's kind of the same thing here with it's the same thing here with the
knowledge of the flows.
Right. Exactly. Knowing, okay, we're probably gonna be attacked here, and there's a nice choke point here, so let's get here. Or shoot, we're probably gonna be swarmed here soon, so let's get to a
save your bombs and
right, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And oh, there's a barrel of lamp oil, so grab that and bring it along. Because we're probably gonna get swarmed here soon. Like, knowing kind of the ebb and flows, or like conserving ammo. Like, oh, we're gonna be in a big scrap here soon, so save your ammo. Don't. That type of thing.
Stuff. Yeah.
Right.
Vela did mention something kind of funny. Talking about pathfinding in the forest. For the longest time in the early development of the forest, NPCs did not detect water.
Yeah.
So they would pathfind and just run under rivers and ponds and lakes and just be the most annoying things in the world. While you're struggling to swim and you got to make boats across, they just run full speed across the beds of whatever. It was both the most horrifying and hilarious thing I've ever watched.
Right.
But you could also exploit it because if you made a houseboat, they couldn't get you because they couldn't jump that high.
Right. So they were on the bottom trying to get to you, but they couldn't float.
Right. And so that was an interesting experience. And the Force is an interesting game because it's supposed to be like a horror survival game, like an open environment horror survival game. But it's just a box full of hilarity.
Right. Well, I mean, kind of a lot of the concept of what we want to do with Storybricks, and why you have kind of like you try to do more interesting things with AI is because you want a little bit of that unpredictability. Like the polite term for it is emergent behavior. When it's not doing silly things like letting monsters run through the bottom of a lake without any impediment. And so like that's what we wanted to do with Storybricks, was basically have that kind of novel experience where you like you may understand there's a love triangle, and you might start to recognize that pattern. But like it's still an interesting thing because these NPCs that have their own personalities. A lot of what we did for modeling, so one of the more interesting things we did for modeling the NPCs too was how we the model we kind of picked. So one of the things we picked was this well-known psychology model called Ocean. It's called the Big Five or the Ocean, or I guess also called Canoe. because there's basically 5 aspects that are represented. O is openness, C is conscientiousness, E is extroversion, A is shoot, what is A?
We've gone over this before.
Yeah. N is neuroticism, and then each of these different topics have
aggressiveness, or agreeableness.
Aggressiveness. Agreeableness. That's right. Right. Yeah. There's kind of generally a positive and a negative. Yeah. So basically, like how, and so and then each of these also have kind of like 5 different kind of 5 or 6 different sub aspects to it. And so a lot of it was basically about modeling the characters and then basically giving them the using that to basically give them the proper motivations.
So you were basically generating personality types for them.
Right. Well, yeah, or generating personality. Going to be assigned randomly, or have different kind of templates for how things work. Yeah, give me 1 second. Sorry about that.
It's all good.
Yeah, and so basically, going back to the love triangle, if you have the one person that was very high agreeableness, if you had somebody who was very high agreeableness, then gotta make sure we don't do that much. They would probably try to reconcile with their partner. Try to resolve the love triangle. If they had high neuroticism, well, they probably would would be more likely to leave, or they have low agreeableness. Of course, then the really interesting things happen. Like, what happens if they have high agreeableness and high neuroticism?
Right. Makes things interesting.
Right. And this is where this is where you kind of this is where kind of the really interesting stories come about.
Mm-hmm.
Since you don't know, since you don't necessarily know how people are going to react, how the characters are going to react, you might have.
Phil says that's when they go crazy and become a mass murderer.
Right.
Gandhi from Civ.
Your hard work has just been rewarded.
Did we?
When
No.
that went negative. See, I see the reference that was pulling out. So there's a thing in the Civilization games where.
Right, I think I remember this one. Yeah, Gandhi. He started with such a high value that it could basically wrap back around and become hugely negative.
Yeah. So once you got to a certain point of the game, he would literally just start nuking everyone.
Right.
Oh, there you are. Like I'm like, where the heck is this guy?
Right.
That's what Vel is referring to. Their stats are so messed up. Their neuroticism and agreeableness get so messed up that they just start nuking everyone with love.
Right.
And that could be a emergent behavior.
Right. Well, I mean, like again, the other term for emergent behavior is bug. When it's just something you don't want it to, like that's the bug.
Depends on how amusing it is.
Right. Well, usually stuff like that is like developers want to catch that. They don't want to necessarily encourage that. But yeah, so you and so like the idea was we would build kind of these different models of the characters.
Mm-hmm.
And then put them into plots, and then and like I said, kind of the interesting thing would be to have, when you have the players, being able to kind of fill in one of the slots of the plot. The other thing we were looking at doing was that like how characters react to you. based on kind of intangible things. One of the examples I like to think about is in a typical fantasy MMO, you have a queen who lost her necklace and she wants the necklace back, and the orc stole the necklace, and so you go and you kill the head orc and get the necklace. You go back and says, "Oh, hey, here's some experience in gold. Thank you very much." And that's kind of like most people just kind of do it without thinking about it. But kind of the concept I wanted to play around with was what happens if instead of like the queen giving you like some gold or whatnot, what if the queen says, "Now you have my favor.
Mm-hmm.
You are, you've done a great service to the crown, and so now, you have favor, and this will basically let us, the crown will look more favorably upon you in the future."
Look what we found.
And so, and that is something that becomes interesting because then, wow, that's a whole lot of crap.
Yep.
And so the idea is that what happens when like how other people, how the other characters will perceive you.
Mm-hmm.
I guess somebody wants to leave.
I guess. And it's kind of like taking like a reputation system and just building a new layer to it.
Right. But yeah, but instead of one of those things like where typical reputation system like, oh, go grind these daily quests or go grind this item and go get this drop.
Right. It sounds more
Keep it powered and protected from
inclined with like a fame system in a single player RPG type game.
Right.
And just incorporating it into an MMO environment.
Right.
So
did you want to get going? Did you want to extract her?
Yeah, we can extract this guy. Revenant's not really doing me a whole lot of fun here.
Okay.
Which I'd love to see that in an MMO setting. Like I would love, because that's something that you'd see out of like a Bethesda game. In theory.
Right.
And I would love to see Bethesda type engines or systems put into an MMO, because that would make an immersive online.
Right.
Experience.
Keeping in mind that like a lot of times really scripted.
Right.
Because like they want a very specific behavior, and so the idea was that, again, like having this open world MMO where like you have a lot of different pieces kind of moving simultaneously. And I kind of go back to Dejara's question. So the planning would be the plot, where it wouldn't necessarily be the characters planning it, specific for long term. Although we were kind of we had the idea of characters kind of doing longer term plans, but a lot of the times the plots would be kind of like what would drive characters in the kind of the moderate term, where they would kind of line themselves up to get like if the system kind of picked, okay, we're gonna have this love triangle plot, and you and you and you are on this love triangle, the characters then basically kind of like maneuver themselves into getting into this love triangle, and then they would basically interact with the love triangle through the rules of the system. And so I mean, like the idea was that we wanted the kind of like the world to have a spark of life, not necessarily that like everything would revolve around this necessarily, but that you would have a world that would basically feel more alive. You'd go into town, you'd see people interacting, you'd see people doing things like this NPC that you saw over there. The NPC you sell your stuff to, is normally happy-go-lucky guy, but all of a sudden now he's like really morose. Well, why is he morose? Oh, his wife left him for the blacksmith, and you have maybe you can do something for, like, if you like that guy, maybe you could do something for him, like if you're evil, you go kill the blacksmith. If you're or like maybe he start him on a hobby of stamp collecting or something like that. Something potentially less silly than that, but like that's kind of the idea, is that you would be able to interact with these NPCs.
So my question is, in a practical sense, would this be like talking about like the love triangle or the blacksmith like
Mm,
suddenly having a change in behavior? Would that be
mm.
for like quest generation, like
I mean, like
procedurals?
the idea would be like I mean, vaguely. So, like, if people are kind of familiar with the original Ultima Online ecology, like the idea of you wouldn't necessarily have quests like with somebody with an exclamation over their head, point over their head, saying, "Oh, go kill the blacksmith for me," um, but like you'd be able to interact with people in order to accomplish goals. Um, so say like say for example you go to the blacksmith and you get, like I said, usually the blacksmith is a happy-go-lucky guy. You want to, he lost his wife. She fled to another town to be with another blacksmith. So you do something for him to cheer him up. Maybe you give him a gift, or maybe you get him started on a hobby or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's kind of up to you on how to do it. Instead of him having an exclamation point over his head and he's like, "Oh, woe is me, my wife left me. Can you cheer me up?" And then everybody else doing exactly the same thing in order to cheer up this guy because that's just part of the story.
Right.
And so the idea would be and then again, like the players would kind of become part of this ecology of this larger active group of people. They would interact and and they, kind of, obviously, like there would need to be a lot of kind of like fine tuning and working here, because you could have one person. I mean, speaking of Bethesda games, like you want to avoid the situation where somebody just goes into town, kills everybody, and goes, "Haha, screw your hard work and making the blacksmith happy because I've just committed genocide."
I mean, that's how you do it, though.
Right. That's how Bethesda games work, right?
Right. Screw Caesar. I'm working for the not NR, NCR. Yeah, that's the right acronym. Ooh, I almost screwed up there. Nordic Ninja says, help the blacksmith out of his rut. He makes better items. Opens up all sorts of options from that alone.
Right. I mean, yeah. So basically, you could have something where, like mood would influence like what the character made, or more of what we wanted to do was like focus on interpersonal relationships. So
Mm-hmm.
if you're basically essentially if you're the guy, the blacksmith, who the shoulder of the blacksmith goes to cry on. I mean, that would basically create a much deeper bond between you and the blacksmith in the future. And then you and the blacksmith, may be willing to do more things for you. Like, oh, like, I'll give you a discount, or I'll create this thing that, like, I don't, it's long and hard and arduous, and I don't really like doing it, but I'm gonna do it for you because you're a good guy.
Right. So, I mean, I'm just thinking about it from my experiences
Mm-hmm.
of all the different RPGs and MMOs I've played. Would that I'm still on like the practical level here.
Mm-hmm.
Would that be like a persistent thing? Like you help him once and then you unlock whatever goodies he's offering, or would it be like a weekly reset kind of a deal?
No, I mean, it would be a persistent thing. I mean, like, the idea would be that it would be just like if you had a friend and you went and sold them because they just
Mm-hmm.
broke up with their girlfriend who left them for another guy. You're, like, the guy, that's going to deepen your friendship.
Right.
And so, like, it's not going to reset in a week. It's not going to be, like, oh, you're a friend forever. Because if you go and piss off the guy, like, if you go and, if you go and start dating his girlfriend, then, he's not going to be that happy with you.
Right.
You start bringing her around, that's going to kind of drag him down. And so, the idea being that, like, you would have to, like, part of the gameplay would be you have to, you'd have to manage your relationships with NPCs. And so
Good.
And so, basically, like, like, your behavior then becomes, part, like, not only what you do, but how you do it sometimes could be something that could influence how the world works. if you going with a fantasy setting, like if you decide to burn a forest, well, the druids aren't going to like you very much.
Right.
Like maybe you eliminate the orc threat by burning the forest that they're hiding in, but like the town guards may be happy with you, but the druids are not going to be happy with you.
No, Nordic Ninja actually brings up an interesting point.
Hmm.
Oh, what if the rut of the blacksmith having his girlfriend leave him, for example,
Mm.
was caused by another player
Right.
stealing the girlfriend?
Right, exactly. I mean, and so like I said, you'd have the love triangle plot, and it could be that the person that's the person that the other person in the relationship could be another player. So like this other player steals away the girlfriend, and so then the blacksmith basically hates that other player. And and again, like it's one of those things that like if you have a relationship with that other player, I mean, this is also like one of the things that we were kind of playing around with, is like trying to measure relationships between players, which is very hard because like a lot of times that relationship transcends the game.
Right.
Like like there's a lot of things the game can't even possibly observe, let alone know about, if they happen outside the game. Like in role playing, like if people do role playing outside the context of the game, it's like so there's a lot of questions about how do you represent that, how do you have it so that the game like recognizes, oh well like can you just can you just tell the system, oh hey, by the way, like we both have we both leveled up our friendship outside the game, so now we're closer friends.
Right.
um
That's complicated.
yeah. Oh, I mean, and it's prone to abuse. Like if you say, oh, we'll just say whatever, like
Oh,
our
we're
friend, we'll set our friendship
totally
to the right values.
friends.
Right. We'll set our friendship to the right value in order to get what we need out of this quest, and then set it back to whatever we want later.
Mm.
But yeah, like so the idea was that you could have other players, and so then and then kind of, but going to the role playing, so you go confront the other player, that stole the blacksmith's wife, and you accuse her and say, why did you steal the blacksmith's wife? And she's like, well, she's cute and I was lonely, and she felt, she started flirting with me first.
It's all that. Never mind. Never mind.
Right. And so and so basically then you have a role play, like a little role playing opportunity there as well. Like you can start role playing with that character and say, oh, but if the blacksmith's my friend, you did something wrong, and like maybe the player might come around and say, oh, you're right, it was wrong of me to steal the blacksmith's wife, or maybe they're like, no, like I'm in the relationship now, and the blacksmith can go, playing fish in the sea, the blacksmith can go find somebody else.
Okay. The more you say blacksmith, though, the more I want to pull out a Markiplier reference.
I can pick something else. I'm just using blacksmith because it's like, so like like the basic Storybricks world we created was it was intentionally a very generic fantasy fairy tale land to let people kind of tell stories in. The original, so the implementation of Storybricks we did was a visual scripting language that had like literal bricks that you basically would put together to basically create basically essentially a programming language. And so it was very simple. It's basically kind of going back to what we were talking about with behavioral trees. Is basically we were doing kind of straight up scripting behavioral trees, but like the idea was that eventually we'd be able to put in more kind of a flexibility, more values as we develop the system.
Mm.
We
marked on navigation.
so like a lot of my examples are going to be coming from very generic fantasy settings, but like there's no reason why there's no reason why you would have to restrict it to that. I mean, you could do a science fiction setting, you could do a modern setting, you could do a supernatural setting, or urban fantasy.
Yeah, like everything that you explain, it sounds very like it would make a very interesting BioWare. Like if words you were to make like a Mass Effect MMO like they tried to do with Star Wars: The Old Republic. Having the Storybricks tools
We're here
could
in
make that
search of lost
very
artifacts,
interesting
items buried deep
to
below the
interact
surface. The
with
scanner has picked up a target.
the
Go to
the
dig site.
NPCs in the world
fishers.
instead of it just being
Right.
run through the main story quest. Okay, you get to make these choices that literally determines nothing.
Right. Right.
You can actually take the Storybrick tools, implement them in the BioWare decision-making tools or system, and then actually have consequence to the decisions made. That's something that I could see working.
Right.
Could have worked
Right.
very well.
Right. No, and so kind of the big trick you kind of have to worry about is, one, modeling the characters. But yeah, like I said, we were kind of using the big five, very well known psychological modeling for personalities. The other thing you have to kind of deal with is like, how do you interact? How do you allow players to interact meaningfully with NPCs? This is basically this is something in game development called the thin pipe, fat pipe.
Okay.
Where because when you're playing a game, for example, like say take Warframe, what we're playing right now. You have a very fat pipe giving you feedback about what's going on. You have the UI that kind of gives you various information. You have your character in the world and the position. You have animation. You can show like different states of the game based on so when I use an ability, all of a sudden my character does an animation. I do World on Fire, and so now I can see like little gouts of flame all around me. You can give a lot of information about the state of the world, but on the flip side, when the player tries to interact with the world, you have a very thin pipe.
Right.
Like I have 4 movement keys. I have 4 ability keys. I have my mouse to aim. I have a fire. I have a block. Like the number of things I can do to interact with. And keep in mind, like it's going to be limited because this is an action game. You don't want it to be super complex. Because you kind of want to strip it down and let the action kind of speak for itself.
Right, where a game like Minecraft is a very fat pipe for environmental interaction.
Well, no, it's still a very thin pipe, and actually it's a much thinner pipe. Because
you can only do 2 things basically: pick up or drop down.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
Or you can also attack monsters and stuff like that. So I mean it. But you get the point. Like where the game becomes interesting is like how the game reacts to that, because the game can react differently based on like what kind of brick you're plopping down.
Or redstone.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Then so you use so like good games like Minecraft will use very simple very simple input to create much more complex interaction. Putting down this redstone wire, putting down redstone wire here to kind of putting down redstone torch here, creating a redstone circuit that does this very complex thing is very interesting.
Right.
Even though the actual verbs you're using are very simple. And so the problem is that when like you and I interacting, like our interactions are very complex.
Right.
Even just over this, you can hear the tone of my voice, the words I select. What my focus is when I'm talking about, like if I'm cursing you out for being an idiot in the game, instead of talking about the podcast thing.
Every day of my life.
Well, I mean, because it's very important that you realize how much you suck. Otherwise, you might not stop sucking.
No promises.
Right.
Oh. Goody goodies.
Nice. Yeah, and so like language is a very complex thing, and like if you were in person, then you could also see my body language, my like the non-verbal communication between us, that type of thing would also add to it. And so like like there's no easy way for us to, as game developers, to basically to kind of like to keep that to basically duplicate that fat pipe of interaction, which is what we need, which is kind of what we're used to for interacting with each other in the real world.
You are going to need more reactant if you want to that relic.
Right.
And so like how do you and so like I mean it's not an impossible thing. Like for example, BioWare, and going back to BioWare has the interaction wheel.
Right.
You pick from a few interactions, and basically like it tries to give you some meaningful interactions. Another example would be like The Sims, which gives you a few more interactions between people.
Or the David Cage games.
Right. Press F to doubt.
L.A. Noire actually popped up in my head, where you have to study characters' reactions to your questioning, and you have to study their facial responses and their body language, and
so they're using the fat pipe of feedback. And to basically kind of make up for the thin pipe of interaction or input.
Yeah. Oblivion, Elder Scrolls 4. When you wanted to do bargaining with shopkeepers, you'd have to study their character expressions to determine whether or not your dialogue selections were agreeable with them or not. So that's another example.
And sometimes like some games will basically do like a little mini for interaction, like
Fable,
the game.
I think.
Right. There was an MMO that basically like had a card game. Basically had like a card game that basically you played when you were trying to interact. Oh, there's a.
Oh, that's interesting.
Of course,
of course, I gotta ask you.
Right. It was an SOE game. It was canceled.
North. I know which one you're talking about. Legends of the North or something like that.
No. Is it one? Shoot. Give me a second.
Guys, both stumped. Jeez.
This is the problem with having like a pretty good memory, but not quite.
It wasn't Nora.
Vanguard.
I do remember that one.
Yeah. And so like they had like, of course, the downside of that was that it became a the downside of that is it just became like another game system that because people played the game rather than use this as truly interactive with characters, because you had you could have clothes that would affect the value, affect your social stats, and so people would have like a very flashy suit that they would use for I'm gonna go diplomacy now, so I'm gonna put on my diplomacy clothes and get my good diplomacy cards, and then they would play it as a game and then focus on playing the game as a game rather than as interaction with the NPCs.
And that was just a huge common issue that SOE did with a lot of their games of that era as well.
I believe Vanguard was developed outside, and they SOE later acquired it. So
I just remember SOE being they got really heavy in the trading card stuff.
Yeah.
Around that time that Vanguard popped up on their store.
Right.
That's what I was thinking about.
Yeah. And so you can try to kind of like have another game have another kind of game system to represent NPC interactions,
Mhm.
but then like I said, then the problem is the focus becomes on the game rather than on
The interaction, yeah.
interaction. Yeah. And so like a lot of what a lot of what we were trying to do with Storybricks was kind of like, how do we put the focus on the interaction? How do we get it so interacting with the characters was the interesting part, and and then kind of potentially dealing with the consequence. The other thing, the other idea I really wanted to play around with was the idea of, like I said, kind of like more explicitly about
That's it. You open
managing managing relationships with different characters.
dig complete.
Mhm.
You could potentially be like, if you just want to be a barbarian warrior that goes around and smacks things with an axe and not care about relationships, maybe you build a good relationship with the guy who buys your loot or whatnot, but you may not care about people beyond that. Well, that's fine. Or you could potentially you could focus on the interaction with people and try to kind of make friends with very different and varied groups of people. Essentially, become a diplomat.
Mhm.
You're the type of person that can play nice, and then you could also have gameplay where, well, I want to go talk to the Sorcerer's Guild. I want to go talk to the Sorcerer's Guild, but I have they don't know me from anybody. I go to you, who might be playing more of a diplomat character, who has good connections with the Sorcerer's Guild.
Mhm.
And so then you kind of essentially give me the right introductions to so that the Sorcerer's Guild actually wants to talk to me instead of just blowing me off as some kind of stranger that's probably there to steal their secrets.
Right. Yeah, I'm actually reminded of a game that I have on Steam. It's a little bit of like attempt at like Minecraft 2.0. It's called Planet Explorers.
Mm.
But one of the things that it does is it will generate prefab villages, NPC villages, kind of like Minecraft. But inside the village, like different NPCs will have quests, and I think like every NPC in the village has a quest that they can give you, and it's all procedurally generated. But sometimes some NPCs will. I'm trying to remember. You can every NPC has an individual reputation you can develop with them, and that'll determine what quests you can pick up from them, and sometimes would determine if they would join your team if they're recruitable. So it's a little reminiscent of what you're talking about, but much more rudimentary at the same time.
Right.
All very, very, very much is scripted.
Right. And so you would have different characters would have essentially different layers of basically what they were in, what stuff that would define them. So you might have a character who has an individual that it cares about certain things, and then you might have this person's also a druid, and so they care about nature things.
The multi-layer priorities.
Right. And then on top of that, this person's a villager in the village of X, and so they care about what's going on with the village of X. And then then they're also they're an enemy of this other villager, and so the more good things you do for this other enemy villager, the unhappier they're going to be with you, and vice versa.
You see this guy in the chat trying to promote his own Twitch? You see this shit? Sorry.
Wow. That's what you need to do. You need to start spamming it when we're doing this. Start spamming your channel. Yeah, and so and so basically and so your interaction would kind of be a sum of a lot of these different other aspects.
Excavator is ready to go. Keep it powered and protected from any fire. We need
there.
another power cell for the excavator.
You just need to kind of copy and paste that into.
I just did.
Well, every time we get into a new group, you need to copy me. So. Anyway, to be known as a terrible spammer.
Okay.
But yeah, until like each character kind of like be but so like if you want to play a diplomat, like basically what you would be doing is you'd probably be looking more on an organizational level, like becoming friends with all the people in the village, or the druid, all the druids, or the sorcerers guild or whatnot.
And that can make some interesting interactions with player-created guilds and organizations.
Right. I mean, like Final Fantasy tries to do a little bit of that, where you have the free companies has an alliance with each of the grand companies.
Right. But it doesn't really do anything
Right.
with it.
Right.
I didn't get my thing unlocked.
Nobody did.
Nobody did. Great. Because that guy's too busy trying to promote his freaking Twitch channel.
Oh.
Ooh. Shots fired.
No, he doesn't have a relic equipped.
No. Wait, what was his channel?
Trent's account.
I'm looking him up.
Ooh. See, he's all salty. Yeah, and so the idea would be that you would have and then again, like I said, like things like the Queen's favor, like anybody who cares about the Queen is suddenly going to treat you very much better because you have the Queen's favor. Maybe they want to toady up to you so that you say a good word to the Queen about them, or and so then you'd have all interactions, or there would also you could also have politics in the game where the Sorcerers Guild and the Fighters Guild start fighting against each other for whatever reason. Like the heads of the guild start butting heads, and so then each guild basically kind of takes sides, and But if you're the sorcerer fighter, well, that's kind of awkward for you because now
you got to pick a side, and that can affect
right
which skills you could potentially level up.
Right. Or again, like you might need to find a friend. I'm a fighter, you're a sorcerer. Well, our guilds are fighting, but we're friends, so
maybe we can get a peace treaty.
Or even just like in the short term, like, hey, can you help me do this? I need something from the Sorcerers Guild.
Right.
Can you help me get in there and help vouch for me essentially?
Buy me blueprints, please.
Right. Or yeah. I mean.
Oh, this guy's not even live. What the heck? He has 1 follower.
Wow, look at you getting all smug experience.
That's the artifact.
I think it's a bot account too.
The scanner has
I'm sorry. I don't mean to be a jerk. I'm just being a jerk.
You just are.
I know. That's my default. Now I'll give this guy a follow.
Yeah, and so so again, like the goal here is like to kind of give a breath of life, where you start, because I mean, like I do this a little bit, like when I play Dungeons and Dragons online, like I have one NPC I like to kind of sell all my stuff to. He happens to pay a good price, but he doesn't pay like a better price than anybody else in the game.
He's just kind of your game buddy.
Right, basically, and so it's kind of like or like when I was playing in Final Fantasy 14, when I was first playing through the main story quest, like I'd always like just click on Tataru and talk to her. Basically like it was my character saying hi to her, like being friendly.
Doing a little bit of roleplay.
Right, exactly. I mean, like nobody else was doing anything. Like it didn't affect anybody else. It was just kind of like a little thing for me to go, hey, I'm participating in this world.
Yep.
But like having the game being able to essentially participate back in that way, I think would be kind of like it'd be really interesting.
Yeah, and Square Enix idea of that is triple triad. Which is just sad.
Well, again, like that's kind of a game, game system. Because I mean, that's what game developers do. We make game systems.
I want a real life simulator in an MMO. Oh wait, that's VR chat.
Yeah. Or called going outside.
That's too hard.
Um.
Anyways.
Pulling out the radiant, look at you.
Yeah, why not?
Um. Yeah, it's like a lot of what we wanted to do with Storybricks was, and it wasn't just. I mean, a lot of stuff we were kind of working on for EverQuest Next was a little bit less about the interpersonal relationships, and more about like kind of what Dejar was talking about before about overall planning.
Mm-hmm.
This is kind of where we're getting to the planning stuff. So we would do things called like essentially influencers basically. So the idea would be like going with a generic fantasy trope, orcs like treasure, and so this village over here has treasure. Well, the orcs are going to gravitate toward the orcs are going to gravitate toward the village, and they're going to basically ransack the village and take the treasure if they can. And this is where you kind of get into some of the quests, because like if you care about that village, well, you're probably going to want to go and help the village and protect that, protect it.
Right. And that creates a dynamic decision environment.
Right. Well, yeah. Again, gives the total feeling of life.
Which I felt like they tried to do that a little bit in Guild Wars 2 with the dynamic events.
Yeah, I mean,
and so like I remember one of the end game zones, like certain NPCs were only available if people completed the dynamic events in a particular order or something like that.
Right. The problem, of course, being that like the dynamic events were dynamic events weren't something that basically were basically all like heavily scripted. The event, like you said, you kind of had to do event A, event C, and event D.
Mm-hmm.
In that
this
order.
Guy wants to extract, I think.
Well, let's do a lot of rounds. So I just got my 10 reactant. So
let me pick up mine. Right, like the dynamic events were. It's something that everyone's trying to figure out how to do well, but no one's really incorporated it in a healthy way.
Well, yeah, I think it I mean, to be fair, it's a tough thing. Like,
yeah,
it was like a lot of people. So kind of like touching upon like I wrote about this on my blog during Blogist. I talked about kind of this concept of why Storybricks failed.
Mm-hmm.
The idea was that
Dejar has a couple of questions when you're ready
okay.
for them.
Yeah.
Dejar's first question was, what were the actual brick kinds that existed?
Excavator destroyed.
Protect the remaining dig sites. Basically, thinking about basic programming, if then else statements, comparative statements, but basically it was put in terms of a visual scripting language, so that you it basically it was a visual scripting language, so you had kind of the idea was to be a little bit less intimidating for non-programmers to use.
Okay. Lots
and then
questions.
basically each brick, like you had basically flow bricks that would be basically like if then else, comparative statements. You'd have bricks that represent items in the world. You had bricks that represent people in the world, and these were different types, and each type, like each, and then you had basically bricks that represent an emotional state. And so you could basically do like, if the queen is happy, then the queen, will give out apples. If the queen is unhappy, the queen will not give out apples. If the queen gets a necklace, the queen becomes happy. And so, essentially you've generated a very kind of like very primitive story like that. Give the queen her necklace, and then she'll give out apples.
Okay. You had a follow-up question just asking if it was all just that low level programming, I guess.
Well, I mean, like, so we had the Storybricks kind of like brick programming interface that was like one part of what we were doing with it, and that was mostly kind of like what we were doing to kind of to show off to players like what we could do. We also did a lot more internal stuff. We didn't create a tool, a Storybricks tool for the SOE designers on EverQuest Next to put together bricks. It was a little bit more like more robust developer type tools for that. But a lot of it, the core technologies, what I was talking about. How do we model the characters? How do we model interactions? How do we define these plots?
His other question was, because that was a follow-up. The other question was, what did the inner brick interface look like?
I can try to find a interface. I mean, keep in mind that again, it was a very simple interface.
Yeah, if you put it up on the Discord,
Yeah.
I'll.
Yeah. Let me
throw it out there. Let's go.
We can extract.
Don't forget the reactant.
It's kind of the downside of doing gaming while podcasting is that.
See, we could have gone with the pre-recorded footage that I captured yesterday. Now I admitted that I have pre-recorded footage that I was planning on using. So Dejaro says that their goal is to understand it enough that they could build a functional minimal copy without the visual UI.
I mean, if you go read my blog, like I said, Blogist, I give a fair amount of details about how we did it. I even link to some emotional modeling as well. I go into a lot more detail than we can do here.
So many doo-doo-doos.
Yes.
Ugh. Okay, I have set up my carrier again. Oh wait, I can't. Not enough points.
Excellent armaments, operator. Please return covered in blood. Safe and sound.
Oh wait, where's that list I made? List of things. Okay. I mean, we're on a good subject right now, so we're actually on subject for once. Oh, I found the next set of games for us to play on stream.
Uh-oh.
Vela just linked classicreload.com.
I got an image. Do you want me to throw it into the Discord?
You can put it in the mod chat, and I'll pick it up there.
Put it in general. We'll just put it in general.
Okay.
You can post it up. So that that's kind of an example of.
Okay, so the. Let me pull it up so that I can show it on the stream. Editor. Okay, we'll use that. Browse. Wait, I want browser. I swear I know what I'm doing. Sometimes. Okay.
And so you can kind of see where the different connections go into different blocks. And so the different blocks can basically different blocks are basically depending on the connector types. So basically, in this very simple example, the peasant starts on the road. The peasant has a dragon's head. The guard feels anger towards the peasant. The queen wants to own the dragon's head. The guard wants peasant to not be in the throne room. So basically, you have a very simple story here where the guard hates the peasant, but the peasant has something the queen wants. If the peasant, essentially, as a player, what you can do, is as a quest here is can you get the guard to let the peasant into the throne room, either by distracting the guard,
Bargaining.
fighting the guard, convincing the guard, whatever, whatever you need to do in order to.
Speechcraft 55 out of 100.
Right. Dajara says in the Discord it looks a lot like the old Mindstorms UI. I mean, obviously, we kind of took a lot of inspiration from visual scripting languages, and Mindstorms was essentially a visual scripting language for Lego Mindstorms. The idea being, that this was supposed to be something that people could feel like, they didn't need to be a hardcore programmer to understand.
Yeah, I have no programming whatsoever. I do not know programming, and I'm able to understand this.
Right.
So, good job.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And so, programmers tend to be very kind of word or linear focused, whereas sometimes the people who can't understand programming very well tend to be much more visually orientated. So this is the type of thing, and so and essentially what we did was we turned this into kind of a essentially we compiled this into as I remember it, we compiled it into parse trees, and basically ran the parse trees in the game world, after when it was live, and so we run basically like little bits of code related to the characters,
which is interesting. I hope interesting. I think it's interesting.
I mean, I think one of the big things is we, again, we never quite got as much done on it as we really wanted to. The idea of what we kind of wanted to do is provide the tools to give a much more interesting experience.
Yeah,
to do something a lot more, kind of the idea of and keep in mind this was like some years ago. Like we were trying to do something before kind of like the big, before AI kind of exploded onto the world. And so we were kind of like at the far, like one of the problems we ran into like from a lot of game developers was like this was kind of out there, to put this in perspective, like a lot of times when developers talked about AI, sometimes that meant animation intelligence, like how can you a system to to animate characters convincingly, and they consider like things like pathfinding to be kind of like they consider things like pathfinding to be like just super simple things like, oh, of course we'll throw a junior programmer at that.
And then we got the forest.
Right. Well, I mean, the Forest was a kind of a small indie game as well, so you might just have someone doing. You may not have an AI specialist, doing pathfinding for that. So
yeah,
you get the interesting quirks
to fix it.
Right.
I think they initially had like 3 programmers for it,
Mm.
and then when it got big on Steam, then they were able to get more workers. But for the longest time, the Force was a very, very small development team.
Right, right. Um, yeah, and so kind of like a lot of the main motivations, a focus on role playing. We're looking at a lot of role playing communities, and how they what they wanted, what they were interacting with. We looked a lot at kind of the failings of a lot of systems, like, yeah, because like again, you look at a lot of, especially MMO systems, like faction systems tend to be very boring and convoluted, and not like, go and grind these daily quests and then I'll finally, I'll like you enough to give you this stuff.
After
Um,
6 months.
right, exactly. And again, like, the idea here being they're trying to kind of stretch out the amount of effort you're putting in there, because the more, if you have to take 6 months to get this thing, but you've got some daily activity, well, that's going to keep you subscribed for. Um, and so yeah, so like part of the problem I ran into with this though is kind of twofold. Like I said, a lot of times, like, other developers didn't quite, like, there's some developers that were like really on board, like they could, instantly see, because like a lot of times, like with game development, it's like a lot of art, like, uh it takes a sculptor to see like a lump of clay or a block of marble and see the potential in it.
Mm-hmm.
You give me a hammer and chisel and a block of marble and you say, like, make something beautiful out of this, I'm like, I don't know. And so, like, that was kind of part of the problem, was that, like, the amount of people that could look at this kind of raw idea that we had, see it, and say, "Oh, this is amazing." Even in game development, I mean, game developers, like, we had some people, but a lot of them were like, "Well, I don't quite see it." And players, were even worse. Like, you had some players that kind of, like, that did understand what we were trying to do.
Right.
But then once, but the vast majority of people are like, well, we're looking at, kind of like, well, but like the problem you have with a lot of MMOs is when you start talking about things, people kind of think of a very popular MMO and go like, well, why, like, that wouldn't work in this one? Like for example, like permadeath. Whenever people talk about permadeath, like, people look at World of Warcraft or Final Fantasy 14 and say, oh my God, permadeath, that would suck. I have to collect all the gear again and whatnot. It's like, well, you'd have to change the nature of the game in order for permadeath to work. It's kind of the same thing with Storybricks. Like, you're not going to be able to take World of Warcraft, plop in Storybricks, and voila, it's going to, it's going to be a whole much better game.
Right. You have to build the game around the system.
Right, and and that was kind of like why, getting involved with EverQuest Next on a very early stage was kind of exciting, because they had kind of had some vague ideas along the same lines of what we had done, but we had done a lot more work along the lines of trying to kind of implement that and create, actually, execute on those ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, creating a game from scratch, like, the problem, of course, is that, like, when this is the problem, like, people like to talk about, like, innovation in games, but this is the problem you run into, is that, it's really hard to innovate, because a lot of times innovation kind of, like, as a company, Storybricks, had to work on this technology, well, and then ideally we should have been working on a game as well.
Right.
We had to partner up with, Sony to work on EverQuest Next. But, as people, some people who know the MMO history, like, Sony Online went out of business, sold off, got turned into Daybreak Games, and canceled EverQuest Next. So, but the other hand is that venture capitalists don't want to invest in a game.
Is Landmark still a game, or did that get shut down?
That got shut down as well.
Okay.
Landmark was kind of like trying to a test bed to prove some of the very early and very primitive ideas for the voxel type engine they were using.
Right, and the house generation and
right.
all that stuff.
Let people create, and the idea of all create new things. and then they could potentially use some of those neat things to basically translate into EverQuest Next. Oh, this person built this like wonderful abandoned mage tower. We can copy and paste and rip that out and
That they had to
put it
pay to be able to make.
right. Well, I mean,
Oh my goodness. Landmark was
mhm.
such of a just like I love the idea. Like when they announced Landmark, I was like, "Oh yeah, that's neat. I'll definitely look into that." And then I saw the pricing just to be able to buy property in the game or to have land
Well,
in the game, and I'm just like,
again, it was
"No."
pretty obvious that they were kind of like they
Struggling.
right, they were on the downward slope. Like like I didn't see anything I didn't see anything internally that kind of like hinted at this very strongly. This is very closely played to their chest.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, like they needed money and they needed money now, and there was a little bit of a feeling from people that they were kind of like pushing out Landmark, rather aggressively. Obviously in hindsight, it's because they needed the cash. They were hoping Landmark would be popular enough and get people fired up, and they'd get an income stream
And get
to
like the
sustain
hype
them until
train
they
going.
right, and and sustain them until they could get EverQuest Next. But unfortunately, but again, kind of go back to the idea of the innovation, like creating a game and creating the technology, you're creating technology and then creating the game to go along with it. Because like an example of the way this works is that the Quake engine or the Unreal engine, um, and then like it or whatnot, basically creating the game to go along with it. They would create the newest iteration of the Quake engine, and then they would create a Quake game to go along with that to show it off. And like there's definitely like fans of the Quake and Unreal games, but then they would license it out because they would have the practical demonstration of saying, look, this can actually fuel a game. This can actually this actually is a game. And a lot of times, like the money they made off the game that they made the engine with was dwarfed by the royalties that they were able to collect from the game itself.
I actually played for the first
From
time.
the
I mean,
engine.
this was a long time ago, but I actually played the original Unreal,
Mm,
which I didn't know was a thing because I'd only ever heard of Unreal
mm,
Tournament. I didn't know that there
mm,
was an Unreal single player game,
mm.
and I didn't know what to take away from it because I because I was a kid at the time, and I got
Mm,
out of like a bargain bin or something. I'm just
right.
like, this feels familiar, but what
Mm,
is this game?
right. Right.
And then as I got older, I realized, oh, that was just them making a game for the original Unreal Engine.
Right. Which I mean, like again, like it
Yeah.
was not a bad game and it had its fans, but like it was not only something they could sell for money, but also it was a demonstration of the technology
And
to get developers
obviously,
interested.
the Unreal Engine is one of the most used engines for game development.
Yeah, I mean, like Unreal and yeah, Unreal probably is the top engine currently.
Unreal and Unity, I think, are the two.
Yeah, Unity is another one. I mean, they kind of like, have different. But yeah, and so like this was the problem that we ran into. Being a tiny company. I mean, like when we were working on the Storybricks, for Kickstarter, we were like 7 people, I think. Yeah, 7 people. Making the technology, and then like and we were obviously planning to do a larger game. Like I have a lot of design. I was working on a design for an MMO that would use this. And so we wanted to do an MMO with a unique setting. The problem is, of course, like it's tough to kind of get um to get somebody to throw money into like something that's untested like this.
Mm-hmm. Money, that's the death of all things.
Right. Um, well, again, like you have the investors don't want to investors tend to be very skittish about
New alert marked on
investors tend to be very skittish about like investing into something that they feel is hit driven. If they can't understand it, like, and the reality is like if they can invest in the next Google, it's gonna make them a lot more money than if they invest in the next Warframe.
Right. And since we brought it up, I mean, we could talk about it. It's up to you.
You must defend our
If we want to talk about the
until
downfall of
reinforcements arrive.
SOE. Since it's kind of related to Storybricks a little bit at the time.
Right. I mean, like obviously the way it kind of affected us was that the company kind of canceled all their existing contracts. Because they obviously Sony Online was spending a lot more money than they were making. When when the new guy takes over, they want to make sure that they're actually making money.
Right.
And so they're canceling the contracts, and they stopped development on EverQuest Next, and again, like this type of thing, tends to be very risky, and like
But like when I kind of realized things were going downhill for us, that we on the consumer side, I think was when they announced that they were going to be a fully free-to-play company moving forward.
Well, I mean, the free-to-play business model is essentially was very profitable. Keep in mind that, like you had games at the time that were free-to-play that were making a tremendous amount of money.
Oh yeah, I'm not saying that free-to-play games make so much money. It's crazy when they're the ones making the money. But the thing that concerned me with SOE was that they made the announcement that they were going full to free to play, but then they didn't really have a very strong inventory of free to play games that they were moving forward with at the time. Right. And even I was a teenager at the time, I think, when that announcement first came out, and I was very confused with them. They had this whole brand on the website of free to play, whatever, and I was like, but you only have like 2 or 3 free to play games, and one of them's Free Realms.
Right.
And all the SOE games that I played still had subscriptions.
Right.
Star Wars Galaxies and PlanetSide 1.
I mean,
so it was just kind of a head scratcher, I guess, for me at least.
Right. I mean, part of it is kind of like showing that you're kind of a hip company that can follow trends.
Mm-hmm. Oh, Dejar has another question. Once you finish your thought.
And so like a lot of companies. I mean, a lot of companies do that, and sometimes it works. The game companies that went from social games to mobile games, for example. Like a lot of times the company, even though companies are very kind of heavily invested into social games, when they started wane and mobile games got the new hotness, like a lot of them decided to do mobile games because that was popular. Even though they could still make a lot of money with their social game. I think like Candy Crush was a example where like the King.com or King now had their social games, made a lot of money, but then they transitioned over, put the thing on to mobile, and then were seen as darlings because they were essentially following a trend. But of course sometimes it doesn't work out so well. Like, I think a good counterexample of this was Origin back in the day. After they released Ultima Online, they made the proclamation everything's going to be online, and they basically started killing off a lot of their product lines that basically had no online component.
Right.
Like a lot of their military sim type games and whatnot.
So Dejara asked if I think we talked about it before. If there was any previous code that exists from Storybricks, if there was any code left that could be put on GitHub.
Is there code? Yes. I mean, the code exists. Can it be put on GitHub? That's tricky. And this is kind of one of the sad kind of realities of game development is that, when you have a small company that kind of dies fast, like Storybricks did, like ownership is kind of a funny thing because technically the way the licensing worked with Sony Online was that they owned the code we made, but we had a license to do whatever we want with it. Like we could basically reuse it, relicense it out. They were the owners. But we essentially, in practical terms, we were also owners of the code because we could do whatever we want. We could basically make derivative parts of it. We could license it out to other companies after the exclusivity contract provisions wore out. That type of thing. Can it be put up on GitHub? That's tricky because, again, most of the stuff we worked on for Sony Online is probably still owned by Daybreak, even if they're not using it. Essentially the downside is it would require a lawyer to kind of figure out if we could take that code and put it up on GitHub.
Right.
Unless somebody wants to be generous and hire a lawyer in order to figure these things out so that people don't get sued. Essentially that code is gone and dead. And I mean, there is potentially some earlier code from from the Storybricks, like from that image I showed of the UI. Is that going to be useful? Maybe not. I mean, because most of the effort went into, frankly, the UI. Whereas a lot of the stuff behind the scenes kind of didn't. Was kind of put together very hastily, and then it was like, we'll do a better job of this later after the Kickstarter campaign does well, and we have all the time, and the typical technology lament. There's never enough time to do it right, just to do it right now.
Did you ever make a Storybricks tool for anyone other than SOE?
No. Well, we a little bit of internal work. We wanted to. Oh, that's a lot of crap. We wanted to have we wanted to do mobile games because this is right when mobile games are kind of the bigger thing, and so we were talking a bit about some ideas for mobile games. Like one of the things that we talked about was a diplomacy game. Basically an alien diplomacy game where you had to negotiate with aliens in order to kind of part of the idea being they're aliens, so they're going to think like humans. So if the AI kind of acts a little weird, you can kind of write it off and say, oh, it's just crazy aliens being aliens.
You have a slight flaw in your planning for that though. That game already exists. It's called XCOM. You only negotiate with aliens with explosives.
Right. The idea was that there might be options that aren't explosive.
No, those don't exist. Sorry. So the idea was we wanted to kind of try to kind of the idea was to try to kind of take a lot of the grandiose plans we had for MMOs, kind of boil them down into more of a mobile setting. Yeah, that makes sense.
Setting, yeah. And it was also one of those things as a lot of mobile devices kind of got more powerful. One of the reasons why we wanted to target MMOs first, the idea was that we could offload a lot of the the work to a server.
Mm-hmm.
Because AI traditionally has been a very intensive thing for a computer, where your computer AI tends to get a very small slice of the when you're running a game on your computer, the vast majority of the processing power goes towards graphical presentation, and everything else kind of gets very secondary. And so the AI tends to get a very small slice of the processor power.
Yeah, isn't the
The
pie
idea with
chart usually graphical presentation and then physics and then everything else?
yeah, I mean, it kind of depends. And some of this was kind of helped by specialized cards,
Mm-hmm.
like specialized 3D accelerator cards. As those got powerful, that sometimes freed up a little bit more of the kind of the processor to do other things.
Oh, Dejara commented talking about the license, the ownership stuff.
Mm.
Was don't put that part up, just the last pre SOE parts of it.
Right.
Which
I mean,
prompted my question of, did you make any tools before SOE?
well, I mean, we did the UI for the Kickstarter campaign,
Oh,
which is
okay.
a very simple generic world, where a very simple generic world where we basically kind of like focused on, presenting kind of the concept, in a way that we thought players would be able to understand and appreciate.
Mm-hmm.
But like the downside, of course, is like this is a very early. The tech part of it is still very early in the process of as we were planning, we did work on the SOE stuff for I think a couple of years after that. I mean, so like a lot of the more interesting development unfortunately happened when after the SOE
Exclusivity stuff.
contract. Yeah,
The relic has
right.
been cracked open. Finish the mission to find out what's
And like
inside.
I don't have the code for the stuff. We'd have to find a programmer that had it, and then see if they want to generously donate their time in order to get it running again.
Right.
Because we wrote it for like a much older version of the Unity tool. So it might be the code might need a little bit of a cobweb removal basically, and
Give some TLC.
right.
Let's go.
So yeah. So I should preface that 90% of what we're talking about right now is so far over my head.
I mean, yeah, this is a very special. I mean, and I think like, and like I said, going back to like I think one of the problems we had was it's very bad marketing. We, and I don't think there was a necessarily good way to market it given like the situation we were in.
Mm-hmm.
Because like pitching tools to other developers tends to not be something that people really want to invest in, because you have especially for game development, you have a very limited number of customers that can spend a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
Our best bet would have been to, for example, partner with Unreal, with Epic to make it part of the Unreal engine or something like that, or make an Unreal module or Unity.
Try to sell it to the engine makers.
Right. And then basically, but then again, like something like Unity, like the Unity Asset Store, there's no giant company making a bunch of money off the Unity Asset Store.
Right.
This is mostly like small scale developers doing oh hey, I thought this was useful, and maybe other people find this useful, and then the other developers, and they might make a couple $1,000 off of it, which hey is great, if you're a small developer and you just happen to package up the stuff you're reusing. Not so great if you're trying to create a company that's paying salaries for half a dozen people.
Right. Dejar says it's easier now than to pitch tools to devs. Everyone who wants realistic physics gets a library. honestly, SB sounds like a perfect tool for smaller devs.
Right. I mean, again, like yes, it would be a good tool. The question is, from our point of view, could we make the business work? And and trying to figure out a way where we can charge real, hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of dollars, but still let the small guy basically license it for that doesn't break into the ramen budget.
Ramen.
Mm-hmm.
Let's hear. What else? What other topics did we talk about? Oh wait, there's a message. What was the message? Oh, it's just my bot. Never mind. So one of the things you told me we could talk about, because I have an approved topics list. I'm sorry, I'm distracted. DeJour says, does it have to be a business anymore or make the core system cheap and sell the fancy UI tools? Go open source entirely.
I mean, potentially, but it's one of those things like,
Ooh. Goodies. It still falls. Oh, I need the systems, I think. Shit. I don't have Loki Prime yet. It still falls into the ownership issue.
Right, and we were doing Storybricks as our full-time jobs. I mean, could you do it like as a part-time open source thing? Sure.
But
I don't know if you. I mean, more power to you. I mean, happy to lend you advice and whatnot if that's what you want to do. But it's one of those things that we were trying to the goal was to kind of create a company that would keep us fed.
Because food is good.
Food is good. Being able to pay rent and eat. The two simple pleasures of life that I really enjoy. And kind of like with the wouldn't it be nice if we became super popular and then we got acquired by some company
Sony.
For right. Well, I mean that's.
Oh wait.
Although
that was the mistake.
Well, I mean, from a business point of view, though, to kvetch a little bit about the situation. I mean, Sony Online did kind of make it obvious. It was very upfront about we're not going to acquire you. Like it was like the if we were going to have an exit that would basically kind of pay out the founders and the employees and whatnot. Like Sony Online was not it.
Right.
And they kind of made this very explicit to us, like very clear and very explicit. Like this is not. They wanted to use our technology.
We like it. It's not you. It's us.
Well, I mean, I think this is basically just them trying to set expectations, and also kind of probably being realistic about trying to kind of say, look, don't rely on us to be your sugar daddy because
Right. No, I was just thinking Sony buying up everything that they can. I wasn't thinking SOE in particular. I was thinking the mothership.
Right. Well, I mean, the mothership was having
issues.
I mean, this I mean, the mothership's having issues, and that's part of what kind of trickled down to Sony Online, as I understand it. That because the original EverQuest was a very profitable product.
Mm-hmm. I actually remember Star Wars Galaxies having TV commercials, even after things were going sour for it, they were still running TV ads for it.
Right. Well, there was a business article talking about Sony Online and talking about EverQuest specific.
Mm-hmm.
They said they had 40% profit margins on that thing,
Oh, okay.
which is pretty phenomenal for like pretty much any business, especially a creative business. And so, you know, and you know, you start working out the math. You know, they were making profit of several $1 million a year.
Right.
You know, which is pretty good money for like, pretty much any business. And so, like, you know, the trick, of course, that you have with with game development, and this is kind of where a lot of companies fail, is like, you know, if they can follow up from that and use use the money from the first game to create a second game. An example of this is like Rovio. Like Rovio created Angry Birds. Like Angry Birds is supposedly the 52nd game they created. And like, you know, they really haven't been able to create another game that's been as popular as Angry Birds since. They've created a million variations on Angry Birds. They've, you know, licensed out Angry Birds to, you know, create an Angry Birds movie, all that sort of thing. But they haven't been able to kind of create another massively hit game. And so, like, basically, that's kind of the same position SOE was in, where they had this, you know, phenomenal game that did very well, EverQuest, and they basically continuously try to kind of, you know, capitalize on that. EverQuest 2, Star Wars Galaxies, kind of create something that was going to be that would basically, you know, let them turn that money into even more money but that's really hard to do. That's one of the hardest things to do as a larger company. Like you said, like, you know, in Rovio's case, like, you know, they will most likely milk you know, Angry Birds to the end of time. The flip side of that was like, it would be like Supercell, where they did Clash of Clans, but then they were also able to do Clash Royale, which, even though it's kind of it's a similar setting, and they're obviously using the Clash of Clans recognition for it. It is an entirely new game that is basically doing, you know, they, you know, was a very successful game in its own right.
Right. And that's the important thing. Like, if you get a successful IP that people will recognize, then you... I mean...
Well, that helps, but
game...
I mean, like, you know... Right. I mean, that helps, but, like, you know, the issue is basically like creating a different game to basically, like, to match the success of, you know, whatever game kind of gave you the big...
Yeah.
Again, like Rovio. Like, Rovio kept on making games after Angry Birds.
An example of a company... Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No.
You finish.
I was just saying, like, Rovio created a lot of games that were never able to create that. Whereas Supercell, you know, you had Clash of Clans, Clash Royale, and yeah, they used the IP to kind of, like, you know, Clash Royale might be more successful than, like, you know, if another company had done exactly the same thing, exactly the same type of game.
Like if Fortnite were to make another game and put the word Fortnite in front of it, people would be all over that stuff, you know.
Right. Well, but I mean, the interesting thing here is, like, you know, Fortnite's developed by Epic, and Epic is the one that created the Epic, the Unreal Tournament engine, the Unreal games, and the Unreal Engine. So,
right.
You know, this is another example of, like, you know, being able to kind of, like, capture lightning in a bottle, or, you know, lightning striking twice, where
Right.
You know, Fortnite, you know, just happened to be this tremendous success. And like a lot of larger companies that, you know, are still around tend to do this. You know, EA, you know, has kind of their bread and butter and a lot of the sports games, Madden games, you know, Call of Duty games, but occasionally kind of come out of nowhere with you know, with a new type of game, like, you know, the Sims being kind of a classic example of this, where nobody's really been able to kind of clone the Sims and capture that type of magic again.
Right, especially since the Sims originated from a less popular type of game, which was SimCity.
Yeah, I mean,
If I
SimCity
remember.
was a pretty popular game, to be fair.
Well, in comparison, I just meant relatively speaking. Like the Sims had
Well,
exploded far beyond.
right. Well, I mean, SimCity is still kind of a very foundational game. I think like The Sims came out around a time when gaming became a lot more
Keep fighting.
uh,
Another opportunity to
wide
extract
open.
will appear
Mhm.
soon.
You know, like it got more of kind of a little bit more of a mainstream following. Like The Sims in particular, there's a lot of people talking about The Sims because The Sims tended to have a very high number of women playing it, which was
True.
kind of unusual for games at the time.
Right.
And so like The Sims, was essentially got mainstream recognition in a way that SimCity didn't.
Right.
I mean, but SimCity is still still a thing. It's still going. They still release new games in the series.
Well, that last one that they did in 2013 did not help anybody.
Well, I mean, like, not saying that everyone's
Anyways,
the point being, like, like the business aspect of these things is, and like the CEO of Storybricks, good guy, but he was very newbie to game development. I tried to
fired.
advise.
No, I'm kidding.
Well, I mean, no, he was. He'll admit that himself.
I don't know. It's just.
Like I mean, like, and like the game industry works in very peculiar ways. So, like, for example, the CEO is a very tech-minded guy. So when he kind of set up the contract for a lot of stuff, he was expecting to get bank transfers, money transfers.
Right.
No, Sunny Online actually cut physical checks.
Oh.
And so, like, that affected, like, it affected some of how the company operated, because the company needed those checks in order to pay salaries, and if SOE is going to mail a check, well, then they have to print the check and mail the check, and then like
Processing and.
but we have to get the check. Like, that was one of the problems. One of the original problems is, like, we didn't know where they mailed the check, because we really didn't have we didn't have, like, fancy offices with a street address. Like, we had a couple of addresses. We were using my address. We were using my home address for some of the U.S. stuff.
Oh my.
We had a PO box in some state, I think, where we had registered the company. I think Delaware or something like that. But yeah, and, like, we were all on the West Coast. Like, I think it seemed to went to the PO box in Delaware. And it's like, well, we have no one in Delaware
To pick it up.
to actually pick it up. Yeah. And
Right.
so,
Finish your mission
but,
to
like,
find out
but there was, like, kind of that clash of cultures there, where like, he was used to everybody just being like, we're going to do this fast and efficiently, and game companies being like, nah, we're still gonna mail you a check.
Right. This how we gonna do it. Oh, Dejar says apparently Sims 3 uses utility systems.
Oh yeah. I mean, yeah, like, the utility systems wasn't like a brand new thing for what we were doing. It just wasn't used very much. I mean, like, I saw a tweet, even like just today, like, where someone was talking about, I think it was the contractor that was working with us that did a lot of the AI systems. But, like, he retweeted this thing of somebody talking about, utility systems, replacing behavioral trees in some game development.
What are utility systems? Is that something I'm able to understand?
Well, that's what I described before. Like,
okay.
it's where the system kind of assigns point values, and then kind of
Okay.
compares the point values. Like, oh,
Gotcha.
I'm low on health and low on ammo. Health is more important, so I'm going to seek out health before I find out ammo.
Right. Okay, I got you. That's the utility systems. I'm sorry.
That's utility systems.
I'm a little bit tired. My brain's a little mushy.
That's fine. Whereas behavioral trees is basically develop. It's essentially where if my health is low, go find health else, If my ammo's low, then go find ammo. Else, if the player's close, go try to kill the player. Else, do a patrol.
Right. Gotcha. Yeah, that's how my brain process works when I'm playing Rust.
Mm-hmm.
No, wait. My brain process in Rust is run.
Just keep running, maybe. They won't
Other
catch you.
player, flee. Anyways.
Maybe they just want to hug.
So, one of the other... What else do we have here? What not to do business-wise?
Oh.
Hey,
I mean, we talked
you
about
said
it.
it
We talked
yourself, so...
Right. No, I mean, yeah. I mean, like, and this is important. I think, like, we kind of recognize that, like, it was what we were doing was what we were doing was tough, but like, and sometimes like understanding mistakes, understanding what not to do is important. Like, I think like the big problem we ran into was focus. Like how could we focus on creating like something wonderful for the players or developers or whatever. We were just kind of like throwing a whole lot of stuff together at the wall and seeing what stuck. The old spaghetti method.
Spaghetti.
But like I think the reality is that like we needed to kind of like figure out what worked. The CEO admitted that he kind of let the company run a little bit longer than it should have when he realized he wasn't going to be able to raise the capital he needed.
Mm-hmm.
And so like that kind of dug the company into a hole. I think and I think the other thing we ran into, really the exclusivity deal was terrible. I mean, there was like really no need for that. Like I said, like SO was pretty upfront with us that they were not going to acquire us. They were not going to we were going to get. They were pretty upfront about what we were going to get, and it was. I think part of the problem is that the company as a whole got stars in their eyes a bit.
Because
like,
of EverQuest, yeah.
Because it was EverQuest Next, and like it was it was very much along the lines of like what we really wanted to do.
Maybe a little bit of too good to be true.
No, I think because like. Oh, I mean, when you're working on something like Storybricks, like when you're working on something visionary, have someone come up to you and say, especially somebody like that has a reputation like Sony Online, and say, yes, we think this is also the future. That's very exciting. That's very that's very cool. Like it's right. Validation that like all these crazy things you're working on in an office where in London, like in a house that you're renting out, like this is validation that all this crazy shit you're doing is worth it.
Right.
And so it's very exciting how you get wrapped up in that, like, oh, Sony wants to use our stuff for the next EverQuest game. Like, this is validation. This is great. I mentioned in one of my articles I was talking about, around the same time that we were talking to the Sony group, like Riot, the makers of League of Legends, came to us too. Mm-hmm. They wanted to create. They basically, like, the first thing they needed was, like, in the short term, is they wanted us to do a better job with the bots. With their bots in the game, and so to do more. But they like any large company, kind of like what I was saying, like Riot is the same way. Like Riot's always looking for their next big success.
Right.
After League of Legends. And so like they had a couple of like unannounced projects. They kind of strongly hinted that our AI expertise would be very, very useful for. And when they heard that we had because the exclusivity with Sony Online was just for MMO development.
Right.
But then when they heard that we couldn't work on any other MMOs,
Oh, so that's interesting.
Right. I mean, I don't think anything's really come out of it, But yeah,
Oh,
like
League of
obviously,
Legends MMO.
I mean, but obviously they were looking very specifically at Storybricks for a reason. It's just in the short term that we weren't going to be able to do the thing that was going to be. We weren't going to be able to do something that was along the lines of what we had been talking about with the Storybricks stuff.
Mm-hmm.
The short term is going to be more mundane artificial intelligence AI stuff.
Right.
And so I think that appeared a lot less appealing to the company as a whole. Even though I think the reality was that like holding our nose and making the game.
It would have been a safer bet.
Right, it would have been a safer bet. We would have had Riot still in the business. Still in business. League of Legends is still a thing. And eventually we might have been able to get in on the ground floor of an internal project. Well, I mean, and to be fair, like we got in pretty early on EverQuest Next, so like we were able to we were able to do some exciting things with EverQuest Next, and unfortunately, like I said, kind of like the company didn't survive the contract being canceled. A lot of the other stuff we were working on kind of fell through, and so eventually it just was the death blow of the company.
Which is sad.
Yeah. I mean, but that's the nature of the thing, the beast. This is kind of why I'm a big supporter of indie game development, because like people doing crazy things kind of need your support. More than if you see somebody doing something crazy, even if it's like a little bit, it's not necessarily the most polished thing in the world. Like you really should go out and support it if you think it's a kind of a cool idea, because that's how the sequel gets made. Like if the first game does well, and the sequel gets made, then those ideas get refined, and that's if the original if the original Unreal game had not been successful, well, we wouldn't have the Unreal that powers so many games today. So I mean, not that Unreal was a indie game that needed a whole lot of support, but they had to start from somewhere.
Right. Everyone's got to start from somewhere. Speaking of indie games,
Dejari kind of says Storybricks was a research project from the sounds of it. I mean, yeah, it was we were doing research and development. We kind of had this kind of crazy idea for what we wanted to do, like how we want to do it. The business side of it was how can we get money to do that in the meantime.
and mentioning indie games, just reminded me that the second Undertale game was released.
Oh yeah.
It's a free-to-play game too.
Oh, is it? Huh?
It's not on Steam though. It's weird. Is this an official game? I don't know. Like everyone was blowing up about it. Now I have to look into this shit. I'll look into it later. Whatever.
Oh, I forgot to brag. I got master level 24.
Oh my. Jeez. See, this is why we can't have anything nice.
I have something nice. I have a nice shiny 24 next to my name. While you only have a 21.
Shh. So speaking of indie games, Bob's game is still on my OBS.
Oh my.
Let's see. What else do we have? Did you talk about the mobile game stuff that you
A
wanted to
little
talk
bit.
about?
Like we were trying to do. We were basing most of the stuff in Storybricks and Unity. At least the front end stuff, and so we were looking to do mobile games. Like one of the games we were talking about was the Alien Diplomat one, where you play a diplomat between alien species and space diplomat. And so basically, figuring out how to keep different sides of a negotiation happy.
Yeah, a lot of the things that you describe for Storybricks, it does come off very obscurely related to a lot of things I've seen in a lot of games. But I think the difference is that what I've seen is just very scripted events
Right.
versus a behavioral AI.
Yeah, and of course this is part of the problem you run into. I mean, this is kind of like the develop. This is what a lot of developers. Oh, I wouldn't say a lot of developers. But some of the developers we talked about is they would look at like well we've got this army of scripters who can script out the AI, and like, we know this works. And the problem with a new technology like Storybricks is going to be like there's going to be that rough kind of transition period where you're kind of like people learning to use the tools, and people are learning working out the kinks and the bugs and the weird oddities that are inevitably going to happen. Um,
Yeah, I saw an article talking about weird anomalies.
mm,
I saw an article that was talking about systematic generated games, I think, help people learn how to be comedians.
oh really?
Because just the sometimes the weird stuff that happens just has perfect comedic timing, and it teaches
Mm,
people how to comedic time,
mm,
like how to time their jokes. Um,
mm.
like Skyrim, for example, just you're talking to a guard, and he'll say something like, "Be on the lookout for anything unusual," and then a chicken just falls out of the sky.
Right, right,
And he's just like, um, yes.
right, right. You bust out laughing, and because the game kind of provides you some expert comedic timing.
Exactly.
That's interesting. Yeah,
Um,
I mean, and so like like I like a lot of the problems that we ran into, like we were kind of anticipating story breaks. Like comedy is actually like a really good example.
mhm.
Like trying to program comedy into such a system would have been like really tough, if not impossible. Like I mean, we were not even thinking about that. We were kind of like still kind of focusing on the basics about how to get like a druid to react to the fact that you burned a forest down. Let
Right.
alone like the guard cracking a joke about the forest fire. Um,
Uh, oh, excuse me. I've been trying to keep that
it
quiet.
is we're starting to get toward the 11 o'clock hour. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, and so like there's a lot of kind of like nuance and what that would I think that's the problem. Well, one of the issues of the comedy is that there's a lot of nuance in the comedy, and even like like romantic relationships and whatnot. Like we can kind of like generally kind of get the shape of it, but like a lot of times there's kind of like a lot of subtlety to it that you're gonna have a hard time kind of capturing.
And a lot of it comes down to cultural learnings as well. That's
Right.
one of the when I was studying German, I tried to tell a joke in German, and my teacher just kind of stared at me like,
The hell's that?
"What? I don't." And I'm like, "I can't. I guess okay, that doesn't work."
Hmm.
And that's one of the things that I've always heard. If you ever go to another country, or that like Japan, for example, don't make jokes in Japan because you they won't land because the culture
Right,
is just so different.
right. I mean, yeah, like cultural issues. Yeah, I have this friend of mine I've met who's from Argentina, and that's kind of one of the things we were talking about. Is like, even though like they can speak English and I can speak Spanish, there's still a lot of cultural issues. Even beyond language, like just certain default assumptions about how culture works and whatnot.
Mm.
And yeah, like humor tends to be like, even in you know a joke that kind of like is funny on in one area of the country may be seen as tasteless in another part of the country.
Only forest fires can prevent bears.
Bears are soulless killing machines.
Now, the joke has a whole other meaning if you use the term bears in another
Oh my!
context.
I trying to do that mature stream. Prove this is a mature stream.
No, I'm just trying to make a point here that cultural context makes a
Right,
difference.
this is true. But anyway, it's quite 11 o'clock. I think we're kind of winding down. So
Yeah, the stream's gone on a little short because we were late getting started, but I think we're at a good point here. Let's hear. DeJoe says, I'm pushing on getting something released because it sounds like a good approach. It would be a shame to lose it to the void where no one could build on it or even just learn something from the internals.
yeah, I mean, this is like this is actually a good thing. This is
Right.
one of the problems we run into. Like this is like one of the things that the CEO of Storybricks was kind of like lamenting is that you have what was there was a company that was basically going bankrupt around the time that we started talking about this, and
Telltale?
I don't remember, but like like the CEO asked like what's going to happen to those assets. I'm like, they're probably going to be stuck in limbo because one of the big problems you run into is like just the licensing issues. Like the good news for the Storybook stuff is like the licensing issues are pretty clear. The bad news is trying to kind of like understand how to exploit that licensing. But a lot of times like especially with a lot of older games you have kind of the issue of, well, the developer owns this part and the publisher owns this part and the developer licensed out, or like even like for software, like if you've licensed something to as a library into your software, well, what happens? Well, what happens to that? Like like if uh um if your game depends on the software, well, you might be able to get a license to that game, but you might have to license that software because it may not be transferable, that type of thing, and that can be really kind of painful. And so a lot of times, like you might have just like game assets that like nobody knows who exactly owns it, and for like a company like EA or whatnot, it doesn't make financial sense for them to kind of like figure out who owns things in order to license it out because, well, they're just like like things like art assets and whatnot. Like they'll just create new art assets. Like no, it's unlikely anybody really wants to really cares about like some low poly model from a game. If they want to re-release that game, they'll create the enhanced edition and create all new models and whatnot. So a lot of times, if something kind of falls by the wayside, it just gets archived somewhere, and then as Dejara says, kind of like falls into the void.
Yeah.
It's kind of an unfortunate reality of a lot of game development.
Dejaro says, release weight. You're sure you can worry about the parts that may need licensing later. Write up an overview for the rest.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, like I can talk to some of the developers, but like I said, like it's just I don't think anybody, it's been years since we've done this, and I don't know if anybody has a clean copy of the stuff that was prior to SOE. The source control servers we were using are no longer around, so like it's not like we can just kind of go and roll back and get a clean version. So.
And talking about the licensing stuff actually reminds me of a game that I followed for a little bit called I don't even remember what it was called.
I don't think there was any patent. I mean, we were trying to get some patents because any intellectual property you have for a small company is a benefit, but
Guardians of Orion, I think is what it's called now. And it's this little indie game that's like being developed by like one guy who contracts out to artists and whatnot.
Right.
And one of the artists that he contracted out to make some gun skins because it's a shooter game. Ended up just ripping off a bunch of models and textures from I think like Black Ops 2 or something.
Right.
And he got a cease and... So the developer got a cease and desist order from EA saying you ripped assets, you stop.
Right. Stop. You can't use those. Those are ours. Yeah. And so then he had to go back on the artist, which may have been just
some random Chinese contractor that he picked up off of like YouTube or something.
Right. So trying to bring suit against that person for the money is good luck with that. Yeah, it's kind of one of the problems with as game development becomes more of a something you do at home and you're contracting out. I have a hilarious story about this, and we'll end on this one. When I was working at 3DO, I was working on a game called Crusaders of Might and Magic. I think I told you this story before.
You told me this off stream, yeah. Or no, we were on stream because I was looking at it.
Were we on stream?
Yeah.
So they contract out to a house, and like so the music house subcontracted somebody else that basically just did essentially chip-tuned versions of Marilyn Manson's "Rock Is Dead." That was a very popular song at the time. And it basically I pointed out to the game director, who didn't want to believe it at first, but the hilarious part was I was borrowing the Matrix soundtrack from him at the time, which had that song as a prominent song, and so I played both. I played the CD and the song at the same time, and he had to kind of went back on them, and they were like, "Oh yeah, sorry, I guess this guy kind of went. We'll make it good for you."
That's right, because I was trying to beg the stream to donate $5 so I could buy it. No one gave me money. I was sad. The PlayStation version contains a New Game Plus feature.
Oh dear God.
Okay, so I think we're gonna call it there.
Yep. It's fun time. And, thanks for hanging out with us, Jajara, and asking interesting questions.
Yeah, and
you can get in contact with me. Like you read my blog and whatnot. You can find my contact on there. I mean, we can chat. Well, actually, you've emailed me, so we can chat and email and whatnot a bit more. But
yeah, we don't really have much of an audience, so I'm not gonna bother rating. But thanks for hanging out with us and making tonight worth doing.
Yeah, it was fun.
So we'll do another podcast next week, like usual time. Tell your friends. So, gonna cut it here. See you on the Discord or wherever. Take it easy.
Yep. Have fun.